Hello again. I observed that cricketer Ollie Robinson is in hot water for a few tweets which he made almost 10 years ago when he was a teenager. They were pretty tame stuff, but of course have been described as racist, sexist, and inevitably Islamophobic. One read, I wonder if Asians put smileys like this, hashtag racist. There followed an emoticon of a smiley face with the two dots, which usually symbolise the eyes, replaced by straight lines to suggest, presumably, the epicanthic eye fold, typical in those of East Asian origin. I mean, seriously, is that what passes for racism these days? Then there was, my new Muslim friend is the bomb. I wish some of these people calling this Islamophobic could have seen how Pakistani students acted in the college I was teaching at last year, chucking their shoulder bags across the room at people, shouting Allahu Akbar. That always struck them as hilarious. I'd hate to be called to account personally for all the idiotic things I did myself when I was 18. No doubt Robinson's career is now effectively over, and it all put me in mind of what happened to the man who, along with Francis Crick and Rosalind Franklin, worked out the structure of DNA in the 1950s. In 2007, at the age of 79, James Watson was a leading geneticist and one of the most famous scientists in the world. He had flown to Britain to promote his latest book, Avoid Boring People, Lessons from a Life in Science, and his appearances and book signings had sold out before he even landed. Everybody was keen to see, listen to and meet one of the men who had been involved in possibly the greatest scientific discovery of the 20th century. In the event, scarcely anybody saw Watson, and by the time that he flew back to the United States, his career was over, and he was fast on his way to becoming what George Orwell described in 1984 as an unperson. His reputation has never recovered from the disaster. Watson is seen today as a dreadful example of that most modern of hate figures, the racist. Before going on tour to promote his book, Watson gave an interview to a journalist called Charlotte Hunt Grubb. Some of the remarks which he made appeared in the magazine section of the British newspaper, the Sunday Times, on 14th of October 2007. The piece was headed The Elementary DNA of Watson, of Dr. Watson in fact, a clever reference to Sherlock Holmes. The effect was devastating, and on the Friday following the publication, James Watson flew back to the United States, having cancelled all the events which he was due to appear, or indeed in some cases having had them cancelled by the locations themselves. Some universities refused to have him on the premises. The charge against him was, of course, racism. What did Watson actually say which prompted the horrified reactions of so many people? Well, among the other things he was quoted as saying was that he was inherently gloomy about the prospects of Africa. And he went on to remark that all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas testing says not really. As if these casual asides were not inflammatory enough for many people, Watson also talked about the idea of equality of intelligence between members of different races, and said bluntly that people who have to deal with black employees find this is not true. James Watson's lifetime in science and the enormous amount of valuable work he had undertaken on genetics counted for nothing, and those carelessly spoken words were enough to cause him to be cast into the outer darkness. Others saw and understood the lesson very well. If it was that easy for a great man like Watson to fall from grace by an unguarded comment or two, how much easier for the rest of us to suffer a similar fate? We're still living with the aftermath of this. This is why a lot of people are very cautious about discussing race. What had he actually said, though? The past history of the continent of Africa might well make the rest of us feel inherently gloomy about its prospects for the future. In the same way, it's perfectly true that testing does indeed suggest that the intelligence of black Africans does not tend to be the same as that of white Americans. We can debate why this should be, but that it is so is beyond dispute. It may, of course, be the case that the research is faulty or misunderstood, but Watson would perhaps have been happy to discuss this further. As for black employees being less able or intelligent on average than white ones, this might possibly be so in certain fields. In short, nothing which James Watson said was really all that shocking. He was not advocating racial prejudice, but rather talking of the possibilities that some differences between human populations may be innate rather than cultural. However, that's what happens these days if you're not too careful, and I expect we can see Ollie Robinson turning into a similar case and not being seen on any cricket pitches in the near future.